My name is Malik, and today I'm your narrator, exclusively for Red Beret. I have an explosive story to share. It's about betrayal, deception, and the consequences of trusting the wrong people. Imagine this: a high-ranking government official, a man trusted by his people, secretly working for a foreign power. Ibrahim Traoré, a leader known for his strength and resolve, faced a shocking revelation that shook his government to its core. A minister, someone who had been by his side through thick and thin, had been secretly working for France. This betrayal threatened to undo everything Ibrahim had worked for. What would he do when he found out the truth? How would this affect the future of his country? The stakes couldn't be higher, and the consequences more dire. Stay with me as we unfold this gripping tale. Before I dive deeper into the betrayal that rocked Ibrahim's world, let me first tell you a little about who Ibrahim Traoré is. He's a man of power, a military leader who rose to prominence after facing the hardships of his country. Ibrahim is known for his unwavering commitment to his people and his vision for a better future for his country. He's no stranger to tough decisions, and his leadership has inspired many. But it wasn't always this way. Ibrahim, before rising to power, was an ordinary man with an extraordinary resolve. He saw the suffering of his people, and he knew that change was necessary. But even in the face of political turmoil and external pressure, Ibrahim had one goal: to protect his country and ensure its future. As the story unfolds, you'll see just how deeply Ibrahim's leadership would be tested. But it was more than just his leadership that was at stake. It was his trust, his judgment, and his understanding of who could be trusted in the complex world of politics. This was no longer just about being a leader. It was about preserving the integrity of his country and the promise he had made to his people. Ibrahim sat in his office late one evening, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The decision he had made that morning had already begun to ripple through the political landscape of his country. But it wasn't over. No, it had only just begun. The minister's betrayal was a stain on his government, a wound that had to be cleaned and healed. Ibrahim had known there would be consequences, but he hadn't anticipated the shock of what was coming next. As the evening wore on, Ibrahim received a message that would change everything. His trusted intelligence team had uncovered something that he hadn't seen coming, something that would make the betrayal even worse. The minister, whom Ibrahim had just fired for his secret dealings with France, had been involved in something far more sinister than he had realized. Ibrahim had thought he was simply dealing with a man who had betrayed his trust for personal gain, but the deeper truth was more disturbing. This wasn't just about personal ambition. This was about undermining the very sovereignty of the country itself. The report laid it all out clearly. The minister had been working with foreign powers not only to gain influence, but also to manipulate key decisions within Ibrahim's government. The minister had been feeding crucial information to France about the country's military operations, economic plans, and even political alliances. What Ibrahim had believed was a simple betrayal was actually part of a much larger, more dangerous web of espionage. The shock of it hit Ibrahim like a punch to the gut. How had he missed it? How had this man, this close confidant, been playing both sides for so long without him noticing? The answer was simple, though painful: he had trusted the wrong person. And that trust had allowed the minister to build a network of deceit that spanned beyond the country's borders. Ibrahim felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, steely determination. This was no longer about personal betrayal. This was about the survival of the country itself. If these foreign powers had been able to manipulate the country's leadership from the inside, there was no telling what other vulnerabilities existed. The more Ibrahim thought about it, the more he realized the full extent of the danger. This wasn't just about one man. This was about the very heart of the country's government being compromised. The minister's actions were a direct threat to the security of the nation, and the more Ibrahim thought about it, the more he realized the true depth of the betrayal. This wasn't just about one man's greed. This was about someone who had been willing to put everything at risk, his country, his people, his government, just to serve a foreign agenda. Ibrahim's mind raced as he considered what needed to be done. There was no time to waste. The situation was too critical. The foreign powers involved would not stop at just one minister. If they were willing to go this far, who else was involved? How deep did this go? The thought of other officials in his government being compromised made his blood run cold. He had to act, and he had to act fast. Ibrahim stood up from his desk, pacing the room. His mind was spinning, but he couldn't afford to let panic take over. He needed a plan. He needed to figure out who else in his government had been compromised. But most of all, he needed to make sure that this situation was contained before it spread even further. He couldn't let the trust of his people be destroyed. As he walked back and forth, Ibrahim's mind flashed back to the early days of his leadership. He had taken the reins of power with one goal in mind: to protect his country and ensure its independence. He had fought for years to build the trust of his people, to create a government that was transparent and accountable. And now, here he was, facing the reality that his own government had been infiltrated. Ibrahim took a deep breath and returned to his desk. He knew what he had to do. He would need to bring in his closest, most trusted allies to help him uncover the full scope of the minister's betrayal. The intelligence teams would be mobilized, and he would need to get to the bottom of this, quickly and decisively. As the night wore on, Ibrahim sent out orders, calling in key figures from his administration. The country's future hung in the balance, and he wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. But even as he made his preparations, Ibrahim couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had always been vigilant, always careful about who he trusted. But this betrayal, this level of deception, had caught him completely off guard. As he prepared for the days ahead, Ibrahim knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. He would have to dig deep, uncover the truth, and root out every bit of corruption before it spread further. He couldn't afford to fail. The stakes were too high. With the foreign powers watching, and with the trust of his people on the line, Ibrahim knew that he had no choice but to fight back, no matter the cost. Ibrahim stood in the center of his office, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on him. His mind raced as he processed the information. The minister's betrayal was one thing, but to learn that his actions had compromised the country's very sovereignty was something else entirely. Ibrahim had always prided himself on his ability to stay calm under pressure, but today it felt impossible. His government, the very institution he had worked so hard to build and protect, was under attack. Not from an external force, but from someone within, someone he had trusted. The room seemed to close in on him as he thought about the consequences of the minister's actions. The man had been a close ally for years, a key player in his administration. And now Ibrahim couldn't even trust the people closest to him. He felt a surge of anger, but it wasn't the kind of anger that blinded him. No, this was the kind of anger that fueled a resolve to act, to right the wrongs that had been done to his country. His people had trusted him to protect them, and he wouldn't let them down. He couldn't let this betrayal slide. He had to take action, and he had to do it quickly. Ibrahim paced back and forth in his office, his mind spinning as he planned his next move. The more he thought about the betrayal, the more it sickened him. The minister had been feeding information to France, undermining the very fabric of the government. The thought of someone close to him betraying that trust made his blood boil. But this wasn't just about revenge. Ibrahim's mind wasn't clouded by a desire for punishment. It was focused on the bigger picture, the future of his country. The betrayal had to be exposed, and the people needed to know that their leader was taking swift action to root out corruption. But there was more to it than that. Ibrahim knew that this wasn't just about one man's actions. This was about the stability of the government, about the integrity of the leadership. If the minister had been able to compromise his position, who else might have been compromised as well? Who else might be secretly working against the country? The thought made Ibrahim's stomach turn, but he knew that it was a question he had to answer. The trust of his people was on the line. The nation's future was at stake. Ibrahim couldn't afford to hesitate. He had to find out who else was involved. He had to act quickly, decisively. As he made the decision to move forward, Ibrahim's mind turned to the minister himself. How would he confront the man who had betrayed him? How would he explain that the trust they had shared for so many years had been shattered in an instant? He had to be careful. Ibrahim knew that the minister, like any person who had been caught, would be defensive. He would try to justify his actions, perhaps even deny the accusations. But Ibrahim couldn't afford to let that happen. This wasn't a time for negotiation or second chances. This was a time for action. The minister would have to be removed from his position, and the government would need to be purged of anyone who had been involved in the betrayal. It wasn't going to be easy, but Ibrahim was ready. The weight of leadership had never been more apparent, and he knew that the next few days would be critical in determining the future of his government. As he sat back at his desk, Ibrahim composed himself. He took a deep breath and gathered his thoughts. He needed to remain calm, to approach this with a clear mind. The country was looking to him for guidance, and he couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. The next steps would be crucial, and Ibrahim knew that he had to move with purpose. He would gather the intelligence team, confront the minister, and expose the full extent of the betrayal. There would be no room for leniency, no room for compromise. The people needed to see that Ibrahim was committed to protecting their interests, that he would stop at nothing to ensure their safety and sovereignty. As he began to prepare for the inevitable confrontation, Ibrahim felt a renewed sense of resolve. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a road he was willing to walk. This was a battle for the heart and soul of his country, and Ibrahim wasn't about to let anyone destroy the progress they had made. The stakes had never been higher. The future of the nation depended on the choices he made in the coming days. Ibrahim was ready to face whatever came next, and he would do it with unwavering determination. He had no choice. His country's survival depended on it. The decision to fire the minister had already set off a chain of events that Ibrahim couldn't control, no matter how hard he tried. The news spread like wildfire, and the media immediately seized on the story. It wasn't just the firing itself that shocked the public, but the reasons behind it: the betrayal, the secrets, the manipulation from within his own government. The scandal was now out in the open, and with it came a storm of public reaction. People were divided. Some were shocked, unable to comprehend how a man who had served Ibrahim for so long could betray him in such a profound way. Others were less surprised, having long suspected that something wasn't quite right. They were the ones who had seen the cracks in the system, the ones who had heard the rumors and whispers of foreign influence within the government. But for most, it was a bitter pill to swallow. The trust that Ibrahim had built with his people seemed to be crumbling before their eyes. They had believed in him, believed in his leadership, and now it felt like everything was falling apart. The pressure on Ibrahim mounted with every passing hour. His government was under attack from all sides, both internally and externally. There were those who saw this as an opportunity to weaken him, to undermine his authority and diminish his power. The political landscape was a minefield, and Ibrahim was walking through it carefully. But even the most cautious steps couldn't guarantee that the fallout wouldn't spread. Behind closed doors, Ibrahim met with his inner circle, his most trusted allies, to figure out what to do next. The minister's firing was only the beginning. Ibrahim knew that more would come out, more betrayals, more secrets. It was only a matter of time before other figures in the government would be exposed, and he wasn't sure if the country was ready for the truth. In the meetings, tensions ran high. Some of his advisors argued that Ibrahim had no choice but to take swift action and show the public that he wouldn't tolerate corruption. Others cautioned him to slow down, to manage the crisis carefully, and to avoid further destabilizing the government. The debate went on for hours, with Ibrahim sitting silently at the head of the table, weighing every word, every suggestion. Finally he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We need to act quickly, but we need to be smart," Ibrahim said. "This is about more than just the minister. This is about making sure this never happens again. We need to root out every ounce of corruption from within the system. And we need to do it in a way that doesn't tear the country apart. We cannot let this betrayal define us. We must show the world that we are stronger than this." The room fell silent. His words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. Ibrahim's leadership had always been about more than just power. It had been about the future of the country, about building something lasting for the people. This betrayal, this moment of weakness, could destroy everything if he didn't handle it with care. But Ibrahim wasn't afraid of the challenge. He knew that he had to act quickly, but he also knew that he couldn't rush into decisions that would further inflame the situation. The fallout from the firing of the minister was just the beginning. Ibrahim knew that he would have to rebuild the trust of his people. The nation's stability depended on it. But there was something else that was gnawing at Ibrahim, something he couldn't ignore. The minister had been working with foreign powers, feeding them vital information. And while the minister was now out of the picture, Ibrahim couldn't shake the feeling that this was part of something bigger. He needed to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy, to understand who else might have been involved, and to put an end to it before it spread even further. It wasn't just about the minister anymore, it was about the survival of the country. Ibrahim's thoughts turned to the people. They were watching, waiting to see how he would handle this. They had trusted him, and now that trust had been shattered. He needed to show them that he was still the leader they believed in. He needed to rebuild that trust. But how? The days following the minister's firing were tense. The media continued to report on the scandal, and rumors began to swirl. Some speculated that Ibrahim had made a mistake, that he had acted too quickly, that he was losing control of the situation. Others praised him for taking a stand against corruption, but even their praise was tinged with uncertainty. The public was confused, uncertain of what to believe. Ibrahim knew that he had to speak to the people, to address their concerns, and explain why he had made the decision he had. He needed to show them that this was about something bigger than just one man's betrayal. It was about protecting the country, about securing its future. He needed to remind them of the values he had promised to uphold when he first took office. But even as he prepared to address the nation, Ibrahim couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him. He had made the right decision, but the fallout was far from over. There were those who would seek to exploit this crisis, who would try to use it to weaken him. And Ibrahim knew that he couldn't afford to let that happen. The future of his government, the future of his country, depended on how he handled the aftermath of this betrayal. And as the days passed, Ibrahim prepared for what would come next. The fallout from the minister's firing had exposed cracks in the system, and Ibrahim knew that it would take everything he had to repair them. But he was determined. He would face whatever challenges came his way, and he would do it for the people who had trusted him. The battle wasn't over yet. In fact, it was only just beginning. As the dust settled, Ibrahim knew that he had to stay focused. The decision to fire the minister was only the beginning of a larger battle, one for the soul of the country. Ibrahim's leadership had been tested, but now it was time to rebuild and move forward. The message had been sent: his government would not be compromised, and no one would undermine the independence of the nation. Ibrahim spent the next several weeks addressing the fallout. He met with leaders from around the world, reassuring them of his commitment to a strong, independent country. The minister's betrayal had shaken the political landscape, but Ibrahim's resolve was unwavering. He knew that the trust of his people was his most valuable asset, and he would do everything in his power to protect it. With the country slowly recovering from the shock, Ibrahim felt a renewed sense of determination. He had faced one of his greatest challenges yet, and emerged stronger for it. The road ahead would be difficult, but Ibrahim was ready for whatever came next. As he looked out over his country, he knew that the battle for its future had only just begun, and he would fight for it with everything he had.